The air hung thick with dust as Lena Marshall approached the county courthouse steps, a folded newspaper clipping clutched in her oil-stained hands. The sun beat down mercilessly on the small crowd gathered for the property auction, most of them familiar faces from around Red Hollow, a town so small it barely registered on state maps. Lena stood out among them, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, work boots scuffed from years in her grandfather's garage. She wasn't the type to bid on mansions abandoned or otherwise, but something about the stone house in the classified ad had called to her. Lot 17, the Sullivan property on Canyon Road, the auctioneer announced, his voice flat with disinterest. Abandoned stone residence, approximately 4,800 square feet on 12 acres. Starting bid $750. Lena's heart hammered against her ribs. $750 was almost all she had left in her savings account after paying for her grandfather's funeral. This was reckless, foolish even, but after 6 months of drowning in grief, the idea of rebuilding something broken felt like the only way forward. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Not a single hand went up. The auctioneer repeated the starting bid, sounding almost desperate now. Lena studied the faces around her. Not disinterest, but something closer to unease. These people weren't avoiding a bad deal. They were avoiding something else entirely. Her hand rose before she could reconsider. $750 from the lady in the back, the auctioneer called, relief evident in his voice. He scanned the crowd. Do I hear 800? The silence was absolute. Locals exchanged glances, a few older men shaking their heads slightly. One woman actually took a step away from Lena, as if proximity alone might transfer bad luck. Going once for $750. The auctioneer's gavel hovered. Going twice. Lena held her breath, waiting for someone to outbid her, almost hoping for it. Sold to the lady in the work boots. Just like that, she owned a mansion. The crowd dispersed quickly, no one meeting her eyes, no one offering congratulations. Lena approached the clerk's table to complete the paperwork, her signature looking foreign against the official documents. Lena Marshall, property owner. The elderly clerk, a woman with silver hair and deeply lined hands, processed the forms with practiced efficiency. As she handed over the final document, her fingers lingered on the paper, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. That place has been empty since '70, not because no one wanted it, but because no one was allowed to have it. Lena froze. What does that mean? The woman's eyes darted around, suddenly remembering herself. Nothing, dear, just that it's been vacant a long while. Mind the plumbing, bound to have issues after all these years. She stamped the final document with unnecessary force, effectively ending the conversation. Outside the courthouse, Lena paused on the steps. Keys clutched in her hand, the reality of what she'd done settling over her like the Arizona heat. The main street of Red Hollow stretched before her. A single stoplight, Mercer's General Store, the First County Bank, and Pierce Realty, its windows gleaming in the afternoon sun. A campaign poster for Mayor Franklin Pierce's upcoming re-election hung in the window, the same face that had greeted the town for nearly 4 decades. As if summoned by her attention, the door to the realty office swung open and a tall man in his 50s emerged. His suit was too formal for the small town, his shoes too polished. He paused when he saw her, then altered his course to intercept her at the bottom of the courthouse steps. You must be our auction winner. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Everett Pierce, deputy mayor and head of Pierce Realty. Lena Marshall. Her hand was calloused against his manicured one. Marshall, Frank's granddaughter, the mechanic who moved back to care for him. She nodded, unsettled by his knowledge of her personal life. Sorry about his passing. Good man, Frank. Everett's gaze sharpened. So you're the new owner of the old Sullivan place. Bold move for someone just establishing themselves here. I like fixing broken things. Some things can't be fixed, Ms. Marshall. Some things weren't meant to be disturbed. He reached into his pocket and handed her a business card. When you decide it's too much trouble, and you will, give me a call. I can take it off your hands. No hassle, fair price. He walked away before she could respond, leaving Lena with the distinct impression that Everett Pierce had already decided how this story would end. She tucked the card in her pocket and headed for her truck, determined to prove him wrong. The drive to her new property took her to the outskirts of Red Hollow, where asphalt gave way to gravel, and finally a narrow dirt road winding up into the foothills. Rounding the final curve, Lena saw it for the first time in person. The Sullivan Mansion, a sprawling structure of native stone and timber that seemed to rise organically from the landscape as if the earth itself had pushed it up from below. It was beautiful even in its neglect. The slanted afternoon light caught in the dozens of multi-paned windows, creating a kaleidoscope of reflections. Two massive stone chimneys anchored the structure at either end, and a wide wraparound porch sagged slightly beneath the weight of decades. Nature had begun its slow reclamation, ivy climbing the eastern wall, desert plants pushing through cracks in the stone walkway. Lena parked her battered Ford pickup in the circular drive and sat for a long moment, taking it all in. The property was even more impressive than the auction photos had suggested. 12 acres of high desert land, natural rock formations, a stand of old juniper trees, and in the distance the glint of what might be a small pond or stream. The mansion itself, however, presented contradictions. There was clear neglect, peeling paint, a section of gutter, hanging loose shutters askew on upper windows. But beneath that superficial decay, the structure itself appeared remarkably sound. No collapsed roof, no major structural damage visible. For a property supposedly abandoned for 40 years, it had weathered remarkably well. With a deep breath, Lena grabbed her toolbox from the truck bed and approached the front door. The massive oak door swung open with surprising ease, the hinges moving smoothly as if recently oiled. The key turned in a well-maintained lock. The foyer beyond was grand. A sweeping staircase dominated the space leading to a gallery that overlooked the entryway. Crystal chandeliers hung suspended in the stillness, draped in cobwebs but intact. Dust motes danced in shafts of amber light from high windows. The air smelled of abandonment, that peculiar mixture of dust, old wood, and the absence of human presence. But beneath it was something else, something Lena couldn't quite identify. Her boots echoed on the marble floor as she moved deeper into the house. The sounds seemed to wake something within the walls, as if the building itself were taking notice of her presence. In the main living area, furniture remained in place, covered with white sheets that had yellowed with age. Lena pulled one away, revealing an ornately carved sofa, its upholstery faded but not rotted or damaged by pests. The kitchen told a similar story. Vintage appliances from the late 1970s stood like sentinels covered in dust, but remarkably preserved. And there, hanging on the wall beside a heavy cast-iron telephone, was a calendar from 1979. The month of July displayed the 17th circled in thick red ink. Lena ran her fingers over the date, leaving trails in the dust. July 17th, 1979, the day everything stopped in this house. What had happened? Why had a mansion this magnificent been left to sit empty for decades, its contents abandoned but strangely preserved? The rest of the day passed in exploration. Room after room revealed the same pattern: dusty but intact furnishings, personal items left behind as if the occupants had simply vanished mid-life. Men's clothing still hung in the master closet. A woman's vanity still held perfume bottles and hairbrushes. In a smaller bedroom, what appeared to be a teenager's possessions remained: posters of 1970s rock bands, a record collection, high school textbooks. The contradiction nagged at Lena. True abandonment would have led to greater deterioration. Rodents, insects, weather damage from leaking roofs or broken windows. None of these were evident beyond what might be expected from a vacation home checked periodically. Someone had been maintaining this place, however minimally. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the western windows, Lena found herself in what must have been Harold Sullivan's home office. A heavy mahogany desk dominated the room, its surface clear, except for a telephone and empty pen holder. The walls were lined with built-in bookshelves, many still filled with leather-bound volumes. She sat in the desk chair, swiveling to face the large picture window behind it. From here, Sullivan would have had a commanding view of Red Hollow in the distance, the town laid out like a miniature model from this elevation. When she turned back to the desk, something caught her eye. The blueprint she'd picked up from town records before the auction lay on the passenger seat of her truck, visible through the window. She'd intended to bring it in, but had forgotten in her eagerness to explore. That night, Lena slept in her truck, not quite ready to claim a bedroom inside the mansion. She awoke at dawn, stiff and damp with dew, but filled with purpose. She had 2 weeks of vacation saved up from the garage where she worked in Phoenix. Time to assess what she'd got herself into before deciding whether to relocate permanently. The blueprint became her guide as she methodically mapped the house room by room, making notes on immediate repairs needed. By mid-morning, the contradictions had become impossible to ignore. The blueprint showed a symmetrical layout, but the actual house had odd jogs and turns in its hallways. An entire section on the eastern side appeared to be walled off inaccessible from the main portion. And nowhere in the plans was there any indication of a basement, though the thickness of the main floor suggested there must be space beneath. During a supply run into town, the strangeness continued. At the hardware store, the owner grew suddenly busy with inventory when she mentioned the Sullivan place. At the grocery, conversations halted when she entered, resuming in whispers after she passed. At the diner where she stopped for lunch, the waitress was friendly enough until Lena mentioned her new property. "You're the one who bought the Sullivan mansion." The woman's smile faltered. "Brave girl. Is there something wrong with the place I should know about?" The waitress glanced around, then leaned closer. "Folks don't like to talk about it. Bad business what happened up there. If you're smart, you'll do what Mr. Pierce suggests. He's been trying to get that property for the Historical Society for years." The Historical Society for a 1970s house. But the waitress had already moved away, refilling coffee cups at the counter, and the conversation clearly finished. When Lena returned to the mansion that afternoon, a white envelope was tucked beneath her truck's windshield wiper. Inside was a single sheet of paper with typed text. "Some things are better left alone. Leave well enough alone." She crumpled the note, anger replacing her unease. If someone thought vague threats would scare her off, they clearly didn't know what kind of woman would tackle a restoration project this size alone. Over the next few days, Lena established a routine. Mornings were spent measuring and planning afternoons, doing basic repairs, fixing leaky faucets, replacing rotted wood on the porch railings, and clearing debris from gutters. The more she worked, the more the contradiction deepened. The decay was almost theatrical. Surface damage that looked worse than it was, while the critical systems of the house remained largely functional. On the fourth day, a local contractor finally agreed to come assess the electrical system. He arrived late, visibly uncomfortable, and rushed through his inspection. "System's sound," he concluded, packing up his tools with unusual haste. "Been updated sometime in the last 15 years, I'd guess. Wirings to code, no major issues." "Updated?" Lena frowned. "I thought this place has been empty since 1979. "That's what they say." He wouldn't meet her eyes. "Look, Miss Marshall, can't take this job. Nothing personal, but I've got family in town, business relationships to maintain." "What does that have to do with rewiring a house?" He paused at the door. "Some jobs aren't worth the trouble they bring. If I were you, I'd sell to Pierce and move on. There's other places need fixing that don't come with complications." After he left, Lena stood in the grand foyer frustration building. Every interaction in town, every strange reaction, every oblique warning, they all pointed towards something hidden, something everyone knew but no one would say directly. That evening, she decided to investigate the eastern wing that didn't align with the blueprints. Following the main hallway, she found where it should continue, but instead ended at a bookshelf that appeared to be part of the wall. Unlike the dusty, untouched shelves in the library, these books showed signs of having been moved relatively recently. Lena examined the bookcase carefully, running her hands along its edges. There, a small gap at the baseboard, barely visible unless you were looking for it. Applying pressure to the right side of the shelf caused it to give, slightly revealing a hidden pivot mechanism. With effort, Lena pushed the bookcase, which rotated on a central axis, to reveal a hallway beyond. She grabbed her flashlight, heart pounding as she stepped through the opening. The hallway was narrower than those in the main house, the air noticeably staler. Doorways opened off either side, leading to rooms that had been sealed away from the rest of the house. Unlike the main areas, these spaces showed no signs of periodic maintenance. Dust lay thick in undisturbed cobwebs stretched from ceiling to floor. The final door at the end of the hall opened into a large study, grander even than Sullivan's office in the main wing. A massive Persian rug dominated the center of the floor, its rich colors muted beneath years of dust. Bookshelves lined the walls from floor to ceiling, filled with volumes on law, property rights, regional history, and government. Lena moved toward a large desk positioned beneath a window. The surface was clear, except for a single bronze paperweight shaped like a balanced scale. Justice, she presumed. The desk drawers were locked, but the mechanism was simple, yielding easily to her lockpicking skills. A handy talent learned from her grandfather who constantly lost keys to tool cabinets. Inside the top drawer lay a leather-bound journal, its pages filled with neat, precise handwriting. The final entry was dated July 16, 1979, the day before the date circled on the kitchen calendar. Pierce has gone too far, the entry began. The Alvarez property makes 37 illegal transfers. I have all the documentation ready and all the evidence secured. Tomorrow I present everything to Judge Holloway. Franklin thinks his connections will protect him, but he's wrong. This ends now. Lena's pulse quickened. Whatever Harold Sullivan had planned for July 17, 1979, he never got to carry it out. What had happened to him? And what evidence was he referring to? She moved slowly around the room, tapping walls, testing floorboards, searching for hidden compartments. When she reached the center of the room, her footsteps on the Persian rug sounded different, hollow, resonant. Kneeling, she rolled back the heavy rug to reveal what the blueprints had never shown. A trap door set into the hardwood floor. The brass handle gleamed in the flashlight beam, too polished for something untouched for 40 years. Someone had accessed this recently. Lena hesitated, her grandfather's voice echoing in her memory. Curiosity's a powerful tool, Lena, but sometimes it takes you places you can't come back from. She'd been 8 years old watching him dismantle an engine, peppering him with endless questions. The brass handle was cool against her palm. She pulled, and the trapdoor opened with a soft hiss of air, revealing a wooden staircase leading down into darkness. Gripping her flashlight tightly, Lena descended. Each step creaked beneath her weight, the sound uncomfortably loud in the confined space. At the bottom, she swept her light across what appeared to be a large basement room. Unlike the neglected study above, this space was immaculate. Metal filing cabinets lined the walls, each labeled with years and property names. A large table dominated the center of the room, its surface clear except for a single box that sat open as if someone had been interrupted while examining its contents. Lena approached the box cautiously. Inside were neatly organized files, property deeds, contracts, newspaper clippings, and photographs. She lifted out the top folder labeled Alvarez Ranch, 1979. The documents told a disturbing story. The Alvarez family had owned a 200-acre ranch on the outskirts of Red Hollow since the 1920s. In 1979, they had supposedly sold their property to a development company called Horizon Ventures for a fraction of its market value. Paperwork showed Miguel Alvarez's signature on the deed transfer. But paper-clipped to these official documents was a handwritten note from Harold Sullivan. Miguel Alvarez was in Mexico burying his mother on the date this transfer was allegedly signed. Signature forged by FP or Associates. Original deed missing from county records. Similar patterns emerged from each file Lena examined. Properties acquired through suspicious means, signatures of people who couldn't have signed documents, mysteriously missing from official records, all connected to development companies that trace back to the same few individuals. And at the center of it all, one name appeared repeatedly: Franklin Pierce. The current mayor of Red Hollow had been orchestrating land fraud for decades, stealing property through forged documents, then reselling parcels at massive profits once development plans were coincidentally announced. Some files contained more ominous notes, references to families being threatened, mysterious accidents befalling those who asked too many questions. In the corner of the basement, a more modern addition caught Lena's attention. A humidifier and several containers of silica gel packets strategically placed to control moisture and preserve the documents. Someone had been maintaining this evidence cache, ensuring these papers survived to eventually tell their story. Hours passed as Lena methodically photographed documents with her phone, careful to maintain their original organization. The scope of the fraud was staggering. Not just isolated incidents, but a systematic conspiracy spanning decades and involving judges, bank officials, and local government. A noise from above froze her in place. The unmistakable sound of the front door opening, followed by footsteps moving through the main house. Lena quickly replaced the documents, closed the box, and ascended the stairs. She closed the trap door, silently replaced the Persian rug, and eased toward the study door, listening intently. The footsteps continued unhurried, moving from room to room, as if searching for something or someone. She slipped from the study into the narrow hallway, keeping close to the wall. As she neared the rotating bookcase, a floorboard creaked beneath her boot. The footsteps in the main house stopped abruptly. Her heart hammering, Lena pushed through the bookcase entrance and into the main hallway just as a figure rounded the corner. She found herself face to face with Everett Pierce. He didn't seem surprised to see her despite the late hour. "Ms. Marshall." His voice was calm, measured. "Working late, I see. Just exploring my new home." She kept her tone light, though her hands trembled slightly. "What brings the deputy mayor out this way after dark?" "Civic duty. My father asked me to check on the historical properties in the area after the storm last night. This old place has been a concern for many years." His gaze drifted to the bookshelf behind her, now closed flush with the wall. "Finding everything you need. It's a big house, lots to discover." "Indeed." He studied her with calculating eyes. "Have you given any thought to my offer? This is a massive undertaking for one person, especially someone with a business to run." "I like a challenge." Lena moved toward the foyer, hoping he would follow rather than investigate the bookshelf. "Besides, I've barely scratched the surface. There's so much history here." Everett's expression hardened slightly at her emphasis on the word. "History can be dangerous, Ms. Marshall, especially when it's misunderstood." He reached into his pocket and withdrew another business card identical to the one he'd given her in town. "My offer stands, but I should warn you, it has an expiration date." "Is that a threat, Mr. Pierce?" "A reality check. My father wanted me to give you a chance, but I knew you were trouble the moment you bid on this place." The sudden shift in his demeanor sent a chill through Lena. Gone was the polished political veneer, replaced by something colder, more authentic. "This house belonged to Harold Sullivan," Everett continued, voice lower now. "The previous mayor who disappeared after disagreements with my father. Tragic business. Never solved." He let the implication hang in the air between them. "History has a way of repeating itself when people don't learn from it." "I'm not easily intimidated, Mr. Pierce. Everyone has a breaking point." He moved toward the door. "It would be a shame if something happened to your grandfather's promenade. I hear the building inspector has concerns about the wiring." Lena's hands curled into fists at her sides. "Leave my grandfather out of this." "That depends entirely on you." He paused at the threshold. 3 days, Ms. Marshall. Then my offer disappears along with my patience." After he left, Lena secured every door and window, her mind racing. The veiled threat against her grandfather's garage, her livelihood, her inheritance, made the danger suddenly concrete. This wasn't just about an old house or historical records. People had potentially been killed to protect these secrets. She retrieved her phone and scrolled through the photos she'd taken of the documents, stopping at one that showed a property map of Red Hollow and surrounding areas. Dozens of parcels were highlighted, each representing a piece of stolen land. Together they formed a pattern: strategic acquisitions around water sources, along planned highway routes, and in areas with potential mineral rights. This wasn't random opportunism. This was calculated, decades-long theft designed to control the future development of the entire region. Sleep was impossible. Instead, Lena spent the night installing the security cameras she'd purchased earlier that week, positioning them to cover all approaches to the house. By dawn, she had a rudimentary security system in place with alerts sent directly to her phone. As the sun crested the eastern hills, Lena stood on the mansion's wraparound porch, watching the play of golden light across the stone facade. In just a few days, this place had become more than a renovation project. It had become a responsibility, a legacy she hadn't asked for but couldn't walk away from. Her phone buzzed with a text from her boss at the Phoenix garage. "Everything okay? Expected you back yesterday." Reality crashed back. She had a job and apartment responsibilities in Phoenix. But she also had evidence of massive criminal conspiracy in her possession. Evidence that might explain what had happened to Harold Sullivan, evidence that powerful men would kill to suppress. She texted back, "Family emergency. Need another week." The response came quickly. "Take the time you need. Garage isn't the same without you anyway." Lena smiled faintly, grateful for the reprieve. 1 week to figure out her next move. First, she needed someone she could trust, someone outside Pierce's sphere of influence. Her grandfather would have known what to do, but he was gone. Then she remembered. Dean Talbot, the retired sheriff from Clayton Ridge. Her grandfather had spoken of him often, an old friend from his racing days, someone with integrity who couldn't be bought. The drive to Clayton Ridge took just under an hour, the landscape transitioning from Red Hollow's high desert to more lush terrain as the elevation dropped them. Dean Talbot's house sat at the edge of town, a modest ranch-style home with a meticulously maintained yard and a Ford pickup, not unlike her own, parked in the driveway. Lena knocked on the screen door, hearing movement inside before it swung open to reveal a man in his 70s, tall and lean, with the ramrod posture of someone who'd worn a uniform most of his life. His weathered face registered surprise, then recognition. "Well, I'll be damned. You're Frank's girl." Spitting image of him around the eyes. "Lena Marshall, sir. My grandfather spoke highly of you." Dean's expression softened. "Frank was a good man. Best damn mechanic I ever knew. Come on in." He held the door wider and dropped the "sir." "I've been retired 15 years. Inside the house was tidy but lived-in walls covered with photographs from Dean's law enforcement career and fishing trips. He led her to a kitchen that smelled of coffee and offered her a cup, which she accepted gratefully. "So what brings Frank's granddaughter all the way out to my doorstep? Can't be a social call, since we've never formally met. I need help, and my grandfather always said you were the most honest man he knew." Dean's eyebrows rose, high praise coming from Frank. He settled into a chair across from her. "What kind of trouble are you in, girl?" "I recently bought a property in Red Hollow, the old Sullivan mansion." The change in Dean's demeanor was immediate. He set his coffee mug down slowly, his expression darkening. "Harold Sullivan's place, that finally went up for auction." Lena nodded, then proceeded to tell him everything. The auction, the strange reactions in town discovering the hidden wing and basement, the documents detailing decades of land fraud, and finally Everett Pierce's thinly veiled threats. Dean listened without interruption, his face growing increasingly grim. When she finished, he rose without a word and disappeared into another room, returning moments later with a dusty cardboard box that he placed on the table between them. 30 years ago, he said, his voice heavy with old anger, "I started looking into some shady land claims around here. Got threatened. Wife left. Department told me to stop digging." He opened the box. "So I did, but I never threw this away." Inside were maps, photocopied deeds letters, all showing the same pattern of fraud Lena had discovered in Sullivan's basement. Names were circled in red pen, Pierce Sullivan Knox, with arrows connecting them to properties and companies. "They've buried this mess under every courthouse in 3 counties, Dean muttered, spreading the papers across the table. "But you found the root. Harold Sullivan was gathering evidence against Franklin Pierce when he disappeared in '79. Everyone assumed he just left town after losing the election, but some of us knew better." "You think Pierce had him killed?" Dean's weathered face hardened. "I think men who steal millions don't hesitate to protect their investments. Can't prove it, though. Never could." "What about my grandfather?" "The name Marshall isn't in any of these documents." Dean hesitated, something like guilt crossing his features. Frank knew. Not everything, but enough. He started asking questions about a property boundary dispute in '84. Next thing, he had that accident on the test track. Brake line mysteriously failed. Not fatal, but ended his racing career. After that, he kept his head down, focused on you and the garage. The revelation hit Lena like a physical blow. Her grandfather's accident, the one that had confined him to a slight limp for the rest of his life, hadn't been an accident at all. It had been a warning. "Pierce threatened my grandfather's garage yesterday. Said there might be wiring issues the building inspector would find." Dean nodded grimly. "That's how they operate. Start with your livelihood, then escalate. They've had 40 years to perfect their methods." "I can't just walk away," Lena said, resolve hardening within her. "Not now that I know the truth, not after what they did to my grandfather. What they might have done to Sullivan, too," Dean added quietly. "You've got 2 options, Lena. Turn this over to someone bigger than them or disappear. But if you think you can hold on to these files and still fix carburetors in your garage next week, you're dreaming, kid." She smiled faintly, thinking of the basement, full of evidence of Harold Sullivan's final journal entry of her grandfather's quiet resilience after his accident. "Dreams are all I've got." Dean studied her for a long moment, then stood and retrieved a notepad from a kitchen drawer. "There's someone you should talk to. Investigative reporter named Mira Delgado. She broke that corruption story in Maricopa County last year, the one that took down those county supervisors. She's smart, relentless, and most importantly, she's not afraid of powerful enemies. He scribbled a number on the notepad and passed it to Lena. Tell her I sent you. And Lena, be careful. These men have killed to protect what you've found. On the drive back to Red Hollow, Lena's mind worked furiously processing everything she'd learned. The fraud was bigger than she'd initially realized, spanning multiple counties and potentially involving state officials. Her grandfather had been a victim, silenced by fear and physical intimidation. Harold Sullivan had likely paid the ultimate price for standing against Pierce. And now she held all the evidence stored in the very house where Sullivan had disappeared. When she reached the turnoff to the mansion, instinct made her continue past, driving another mile before pulling onto a hidden service road that offered a view of her property from a distance. She killed the engine and raised a pair of binoculars she'd purchased in Clayton Ridge. Her suspicions were confirmed. Two black SUVs were parked in her driveway, men in dark clothing moving purposefully around the property. Even from this distance, she could see they were methodically searching the grounds. Lena's phone vibrated with a security alert. The cameras she'd installed had captured images of men entering the house, searching room by room. They weren't bothering to hide their presence now. She waited until dusk, watching as the men eventually left empty-handed. Whatever they were looking for, they hadn't found it yet. The question was whether they knew about the hidden basement. If they did, it was only a matter of time before they discovered the evidence cache. Under cover of darkness, Lena approached the mansion from the rear property line, moving through the underbrush with a caution born of new fear. The house loomed against the night sky windows, dark, its stone facade silver in the moonlight. No vehicles remained in the driveway, but she trusted nothing now. She entered through a rear door, moving silently through the kitchen and into the main hallway. The house felt different, violated, its secret spaces no longer secure. She went directly to the hidden bookcase, relieved to find it still closed, apparently undiscovered. In the hidden study, everything appeared untouched. The Persian rug remained in place over the trap door. But when Lena descended to the basement, she found chaos. Filing cabinets stood open, their contents scattered across the floor. The evidence box she'd examined earlier was gone. Her heart sank. Had she been too late? Had Pierce's men found what they were looking for? Then she noticed it. The humidifier and silica gel packets weren't where she remembered them. Someone had moved them, not Pierce's men, but someone else. Someone who knew the basement would be searched and had taken precautions. Lena examined the walls, carefully tapping sections, listening for hollow spaces. Near the far corner, a section of paneling sounded different. Pressing at the edges revealed a small hidden compartment, and inside a sealed waterproof container. Opening it, she found what she'd feared was lost. The most damning evidence Sullivan had collected, including a notebook detailing every fraudulent transaction, photographs of meetings between Pierce and various officials, and most critically, a microcassette tape labeled Pierce Confession, July 10, 1979. Someone, perhaps Sullivan himself foreseeing the danger, had created this failsafe, this backup of the most crucial evidence. Lena packed everything into the container and returned to her truck, not daring to remain in the house any longer. She drove to a motel in a neighboring town, paid cash for a room, and spent the night reviewing the additional evidence. The notebook was meticulous, naming every participant in the scheme, tracking every dollar, every parcel of land. The photograph showed Pierce with various officials, including several who still held positions of power: a state judge, a county assessor, a bank president. And most damning of all was the transcript Sullivan had typed of the recorded confession. Franklin Pierce, drunk and boastful, detailing how they'd forged signatures, threatened families, and bribed officials to create their empire of stolen land. By morning, Lena had made her decision. She called the number Dean had given her, her voice steadier than she felt. Mira Delgado. My name is Lena Marshall. Dean Talbot suggested I contact you. I have evidence of a 40-year land fraud conspiracy involving Mayor Franklin Pierce of Red Hollow, and I think they killed the last person who tried to expose them. The voice that answered was sharp, professional. Can you prove any of this? I have documents, photographs, and a recorded confession from 1979. A moment of silence followed. Are you somewhere safe? For now. Stay there, I'll text you a meeting location. Come alone and bring everything you have. The text came an hour later. Coordinates for a roadside diner 30 miles away, with instructions to arrive at exactly 2 p.m. Lena checked out of the motel, keeping the waterproof container close, constantly checking her mirrors for signs of pursuit. The diner was nearly empty when she arrived, just a couple of truckers at the counter and a woman in a booth near the back, mid-30s with wild curly hair and intense eyes that tracked Lena the moment she entered. She wore a leather jacket, despite the heat, her posture alert but casual. Lena slid into the booth across from her. "Mira," the woman nodded once. "Dean vouched for you. That counts for something. Let's see what you've got." Instead of passing over the container, Lena placed her phone on the table and showed Mira the security camera footage from the previous day. Men searching her property, breaking into the mansion. "They're looking for exactly what I brought you. I need to know you understand what we're dealing with." Mira's expression sharpened with interest. "You installed security cameras. Smart. I fix things for a living. Understanding systems comes naturally. And you believe these men work for Mayor Pierce?" "I know they do, the same way I know Pierce had the previous owner of my house killed in 1979 to cover up a land fraud scheme worth millions. The same way I know they crippled my grandfather when he started asking questions about property boundaries." Lena's voice remained steady, controlled. "I need your help, but you need to understand the risk." Mira studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Show me." Lena opened the container and spread selected documents across the table. Property records showing the pattern of fraud, Sullivan's notebook detailing the conspiracy, photographs linking Pierce to other officials. She kept the cassette tape hidden for now, her final piece of leverage. As Mira examined the evidence, her professional detachment gave way to genuine excitement. "This is incredible. Systematic fraud spanning decades involving sitting officials." She looked up at Lena. "This is Pulitzer-level material. But you're right. It's also dangerous. These people have resources, connections." "They have a body count," Lena corrected quietly. "Harold Sullivan disappeared the day after writing that he was going to expose Pierce. My grandfather had a suspicious accident that ended his career after he started asking questions. And now you've bought Sullivan's house and found his evidence stash." Mira sat back thinking, why would they let the house go to auction after all these years? Why take that risk? Lena had been wondering the same thing. "I think they believed they'd already removed all the evidence. The basement had been searched before I found it. Filing cabinets emptied, documents scattered. But Sullivan was smarter than they gave him credit for. He created a hidden compartment they never found." Mira nodded slowly. "Which means they don't know exactly what you have. That gives us leverage time to build the case properly." She pulled out a small device from her bag and placed it on the table. "Do you mind if I record this conversation? I want to get your full account while it's fresh." For the next hour, Lena detailed everything. Buying the mansion, discovering the hidden wing, finding the evidence, her conversation with Dean Talbot, the threats from Everett Pierce, and the men searching her property. Mira recorded it all, occasionally interrupting with clarifying questions, her reporter's instinct honing in on critical details. "So what happens now?" Lena asked when she'd finished. "Now we move carefully." Mira turned off the recorder. "I need time to verify what can be verified, connect the dots, build a story that's bulletproof. Meanwhile, you need to stay safe. I'm not leaving town. I'm not abandoning my property. I'm not suggesting you should. That would only confirm their suspicions." Mira thought for a moment. "But you can't stay at the mansion either. They're watching it. Do you have somewhere else you can go? Someone you trust locally?" Lena considered this. "I could stay at my grandfather's garage. There's a small apartment upstairs where he lived. No one would think twice about me being there sorting through his things." "Perfect. Stay there, keep your head down, act normal. Take tools to the mansion, occasionally make it look like you're just working on renovations, oblivious to the bigger picture." Mara began gathering the documents. "I'll need to take these to scan and analyze." Lena hesitated, then reached into the container and removed the microcassette tape. "There's one more thing. Sullivan recorded Pierce confessing to the scheme in 1979. I haven't been able to listen to it. I don't have a tape player, but according to Sullivan's notes, it's explicit." Mira's eyes widened. That could change everything. She carefully took the tape. "I'll find a player, make a digital copy, and return the original to you. With this and the documentation, we might have enough to take directly to the State Attorney General's office." "How long?" "A week, maybe two, to verify everything and prepare the story. We'll need to coordinate with law enforcement for the actual publication. Ensure you have protection when this breaks." Mira's expression turned serious. In the meantime, document everything. Any interaction with Pierce or his associates, any further threats, anything unusual. And Lena, be careful. These men have killed before. They won't hesitate to do it again if they feel cornered. As they parted in the parking lot, Mira handed Lena a small device. Panic button. Press it if you're in immediate danger. It alerts me and sends your GPS coordinates. I have friends in law enforcement who can respond faster than calling 911. Lena nodded, tucking the device into her pocket. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. We're just getting started. Mira gave her a grim smile. The story of the century is hiding in that little town, and we're going to break it wide open. Driving back toward Red Hollow, Lena felt simultaneously lighter and heavier, relieved to have shared her burden, but acutely aware of the danger ahead. The evidence was now in Mira's hands, the wheels of justice slowly beginning to turn. All she had to do was stay alive long enough to see it through. As the sun set behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the desert landscape, Lena made a detour to her grandfather's garage on the outskirts of Red Hollow. The small building had been closed since his death, its windows dusty, the hand-painted sign faded by the Arizona sun. She unlocked the door, inhaling the familiar scent of motor oil, old metal, and her grandfather's pipe tobacco that still lingered months after his passing. This place held her earliest memories, watching him rebuild engines, learning to use tools before she could properly write her name, falling asleep on the old couch in the corner while he worked late into the night. The apartment upstairs was small but comfortable, preserved exactly as he'd left it. Lena moved through the rooms, touching his possessions, feeling his absence like a physical ache. On the bedside table sat a framed photograph of the two of them taken when she was 16, both covered in engine grease, grinning proudly next to a restored Chevy they'd rebuilt together. She picked up the photo, suddenly understanding with perfect clarity why she couldn't walk away from this fight. Her grandfather had been silenced by these men. His passion for racing ended with a sabotage brake line. Harold Sullivan had likely died trying to expose their crimes. How many others had suffered lost homes, livelihoods, or worse? The mansion wasn't just a renovation project. It was a reckoning, long overdue. That night, as she settled into her grandfather's bed, Lena made a promise to him, to even to herself. She would see this through whatever the cost. Because some broken things deserved to be fixed, some injustices demanded to be addressed, and some secrets needed to be dragged into the light. The stone mansion on the hill held the key to it all. Not just a house, but a testament to corruption and the courage of those who had tried to fight it. Now it was her turn to finish what they had started. Dawn broke over the garage with harsh clarity, sending shafts of orange light through the dusty windows of Frank Marshall's apartment. Lena had slept fitfully, dreams filled with hidden rooms and faceless men in dark SUVs. She rose and made coffee in her grandfather's ancient percolator, the familiar routine grounding her amid the chaos her life had become. The small television in the kitchen crackled to life with local news. She nearly dropped her mug when Mayor Franklin Pierce appeared on screen, standing behind a podium outside Red Hollow's town hall. As I enter my 10th term serving this community, I'm proud to announce the Red Hollow Heritage Restoration Initiative. His voice was smooth, practiced the voice of a man accustomed to decades of public speaking. This project will preserve historically significant properties throughout our region, ensuring our legacy for generations to come. The camera panned to reveal Everett Pierce standing beside his father, smiling benignly at the assembled reporters. The mayor continued, "The cornerstone of this initiative will be the restoration of the Sullivan Mansion once we resolve some unfortunate complications with the current deed holder." The threat couldn't have been clearer if he'd named her directly. Lena switched off the television, her resolve hardening. They were making their move publicly now, laying groundwork to justify whatever came next. She needed to respond in kind, establish her position openly rather than hiding in shadows. After finishing her coffee, she dressed in her work clothes, jeans, steel-toed boots, and her grandfather's old canvas jacket with Marshall's Auto Repair embroidered on the back. If Pierce wanted to play the heritage card, she'd remind the town of her own heritage, her own claim to legitimacy in this community. Before leaving, she surveyed the garage workspace below. Tools hung in perfect order on pegboards, each outline drawn by her grandfather's steady hand. The hydraulic lift stood silent in the center, waiting for vehicles that no longer arrived. Dust had settled on workbenches once kept immaculate. The sight triggered a memory her grandfather at this very workbench teaching her how to rebuild a carburetor. "Remember Lena," he'd said, hands steady, despite the pain she now understood had come from his accident. "Sometimes the only way to fix something is to take it completely apart first, see what's broken at the foundation." That's exactly what she intended to do with Red Hollow's corrupt foundation. She drove directly to the mansion, making no attempt to hide her approach. As expected, a black SUV was parked down the road monitoring the property. Let them watch. Let them report back that Lena Marshall wasn't running scared. The house stood silent in the morning light, its stone facade glowing amber. Lena unlocked the front door and entered purposefully, heading straight for the kitchen, where she unpacked the supplies she'd brought: basic renovation tools, cleaning products, a portable radio that she tuned to a local station and turned up loud enough to be heard from outside. For the next several hours, she worked methodically, making visible improvements to the main room, sweeping floors, washing windows, removing cobwebs from the crystal chandeliers. To any observer, she appeared to be exactly what she claimed: a woman renovating an old property, oblivious to the danger surrounding her. In reality, every move was calculated. As she worked, she mapped the house mentally, noting possible escape routes, places to conceal the few remaining documents. She'd kept optimal locations for additional security cameras. The performative renovation provided perfect cover for her surveillance preparations. Around noon, a vehicle crunched up the gravel driveway. Lena tensed, then forced herself to continue cleaning as if unconcerned. Heavy footsteps approached the front door, followed by a sharp knock. She opened it to find Sheriff Denton Red Hollow's current law enforcement head standing on her porch. Unlike Dean Talbot, Denton had cold eyes that revealed nothing, his uniform pressed to military precision. "Ms. Marshall," he nodded curtly. "Mind if I come in? Just doing welfare checks on remote properties after those coyote sightings last week." The pretext was so flimsy, it was almost insulting, but Lena stepped aside. "Of course, Sheriff, though I haven't seen any coyotes up here." Denton moved through the foyer with the deliberate pace of someone conducting an unofficial search, his gaze sweeping every corner. "Quite a project you have taken on here. Historic place like this bound to have surprises in the walls." "That's part of the appeal," Lena replied, following him closely. "Never know what you might find in an old house." He turned to study her expression, unreadable. "Mayor Pierce mentioned you declined his offer to purchase the property for the Heritage Initiative. Generous offer from what I heard." "I'm not interested in selling." "Shame. Man like Mayor Pierce done so much for this town. His heritage project means a lot to the community." Denton's hand rested casually on his service weapon. "Folks around here, we take community spirit seriously. Don't much care for outsiders who disrupt the natural order of things." "I'm not an outsider, Sheriff. My grandfather was Frank Marshall. His garage has been a fixture in Red Hollow for 40 years. A flicker of something: recognition, perhaps unease, crossed Denton's face before his professional mask returned. "Frank's granddaughter, huh? Don't recall seeing you around much growing up." "I spent summers here. The rest of the year I was with my mother in Phoenix." Lena held his gaze. "But Grandpa Frank taught me everything important: how to fix engines, how to spot when something's not running right, how to recognize when someone's tampered with the mechanisms." The implication hung between them. Denton's eyes narrowed slightly. "Well, just wanted to make sure everything's secure up here. Isolated property like this, never know what kind of troubles might find you." "I appreciate the concern, Sheriff." At the door, Denton paused. "Word of advice, Ms. Marshall. This town has rhythms, understandings that go back decades. People who push against those rhythms tend to find themselves out of sync. My grandfather always said the only rhythm worth following is the one that keeps an engine running." "True," Lena replied evenly. "Everything else is just noise." After Denton left, Lena watched through the window as he spoke briefly with the men in the surveillance vehicle before driving away. The visit confirmed what she already suspected: every official channel in Red Hollow answered to Pierce. She was truly on her own until Mira completed her investigation. The remainder of the day passed without further interruption. As sunset approached, Lena packed her tools and made a show of leaving, driving her truck back to her grandfather's garage. Once there, she checked in with Mira via text using the coded language they'd established, casual mentions of renovation progress that actually reported on her security situation. Mira's reply came quickly. Vintage materials sourced. Restoration plan proceeding. Stay visible, but secure. Translation. She'd found a player for the microcassette and was building the case. Lena should maintain her cover, but remain vigilant. That evening, Lena reopened Marshall's auto repair. She switched on the lights, raised the service bay door, and wheeled out the portable sign that had stood unused since her grandfather's death. The familiar routine felt like putting on old armor. This was her territory, her expertise, the world where she had absolute confidence. It didn't take long for word to spread. By nightfall, 3 vehicles had arrived for service, minor jobs, oil changes, and brake checks. But each customer lingered curious about Frank Marshall's granddaughter, who had suddenly appeared to reopen the beloved local garage. Lena worked efficiently, her hands moving through familiar tasks, while she engaged in careful conversation, taking the town's temperature. Most people were guarded, offering condolences for her grandfather's passing, but avoiding mention of the Sullivan mansion. A few, however, showed cracks in their caution. Mrs. Ortega, an elderly woman whose family had owned a small farm outside town for generations, spoke quietly while Lena changed her oil. "Your grandfather was a good man. Helped us when no one else would after that trouble with our north acreage." "Trouble?" Lena prompted gently. The old woman glanced toward the open bay door before continuing. "Land dispute in '85. County suddenly claimed our property line was wrong, said we'd been farming 5 acres that wasn't ours. Your grandfather found the original survey stakes proved the new county maps were falsified." Lena nodded understanding immediately. Another piece of the Pierce conspiracy, attempting to steal land through fraudulent boundary adjustments. Grandpa never mentioned it. He wouldn't. After his accident, he kept his head down, stopped fighting other people's battles. Mrs. Ortega's weathered hand touched Lena's arm. "But he never stopped watching, young lady. Never stopped keeping records." "Records?" The woman's eyes darted nervously to the door again. "Ask Hector at the post office about your grandfather's P.O. box. That's all I'll say." After Mrs. Ortega left, Lena could barely focus on the remaining repairs. Her grandfather had kept records, had been quietly documenting Pierce's activities even after being silenced. If so, where were these records now? The post office was closed for the evening, forcing Lena to wait until morning for answers. She spent the night in her grandfather's apartment, reviewing what little documentation she'd kept copies of the most damning evidence she'd photographed before turning the originals over to Mira. A pattern emerged from the fragmented information. Pierce's land acquisitions clustered around water sources and along the proposed route for a highway expansion project, first drafted in the late 1970s, but only recently approved for construction. The timeline suddenly made sense. After decades of patient waiting, their fraudulently acquired properties were about to become incredibly valuable, worth millions, once infrastructure development began. The Sullivan Mansion itself occupied a strategic hilltop overlooking what would become a major interchange, its 12 acres perfectly positioned for commercial development. No wonder Pierce was suddenly determined to acquire it through his Heritage Initiative. Morning couldn't come quickly enough. Lena was waiting when the post office opened, finding Hector alone behind the counter, an older man with kind eyes and a cautious demeanor. "I'm Lena Marshall, Frank's granddaughter." Recognition flashed across his face. "Been wondering when you'd come by. Sorry about your grandfather. Fine man." "Thank you." Lena lowered her voice. "Mrs. Ortega suggested I ask you about Grandpa's P.O. box." Hector's expression grew guarded. He glanced around the empty post office before replying quietly. "Box 437, been paid up 5 years in advance. Your grandfather's name's on the paperwork, but there's an authorized user form listing you as well. Signed and notarized 3 years ago." Lena's breath caught. Her grandfather had planned for this, had ensured she would have access to whatever he'd been collecting. "Do you have the key?" He kept it. Said if anything happened to him, you'd know where to look. But she didn't know her grandfather had never mentioned a post office box or any key for it. Where would he have hidden something so important? She thanked Hector and left mind racing through possibilities. The most obvious place would be the garage, but she'd been through every drawer and cabinet since his death preparing the property for eventual sale. Unless... Understanding dawned like a physical sensation. There was one place she hadn't searched thoroughly, the 1967 Camaro parked beneath a cover in the back of the garage. Her grandfather's pride and joy, the project car they'd restored together during her teenage summers, The car he'd stopped driving after his accident made the clutch too painful to operate. Lena rushed back to the garage and pulled the dust cover from the gleaming black Camaro. The car was immaculate, preserved in perfect condition despite years of disuse. She slid into the driver's seat, breathing in the familiar scent of old leather and the faint ghost of her grandfather's pipe tobacco. Where would he hide a key somewhere accessible to him, but invisible to others? Somewhere connected to her knowing she would eventually need to find it. Her fingers traced the custom gear shift knob, a brass model of a carburetor she'd machined for his birthday when she was 16. It had always wobbled slightly, a minor imperfection in her early craftsmanship that he'd refused to fix, saying it gave the piece character. Now she grasped the knob firmly and twisted. It rotated, revealing a threaded connection. She unscrewed it completely, and there, hidden within the hollow center, was a small key with a tag marked simply 437. Tears pricked at her eyes. Even from beyond the grave, her grandfather was protecting her, guiding her, providing what she needed exactly when she needed it most. The post office box yielded a thin package wrapped in wax paper, a stack of notebooks, each dated and labeled in her grandfather's meticulous handwriting. The most recent entry was just weeks before his death, a detailed account of a conversation he'd overheard between Everett Pierce and a county commissioner about the upcoming highway project. Frank Marshall had been Pierce's unwitting spy, the trusted local mechanic who serviced vehicles for everyone in town, including local officials, who spoke freely in his presence, assuming the quiet old man with the limp was no threat. For decades, he'd documented their careless conversations, their unguarded moments, creating a detailed record of corruption hidden in plain sight. The final notebook contained something else, a sealed envelope addressed to Lena in her grandfather's shaky hand. Inside was a letter dated 3 months before his death. Lena, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you've found yourself asking questions no one in Red Hollow once answered. I should have told you the truth years ago, but I was a coward, afraid they'd come after you if you knew. The accident that ended my racing career wasn't an accident. I started asking about inconsistencies in property records after working on Judge Wallace's car and finding survey maps on his back seat. 2 days later, my brake line failed during a test run. The message was clear: stay quiet or worse would follow. So I did what men like me do when they can't fight openly. I watched. I listened. I wrote it all down. For 30 years, I've documented every conversation, every deal, every threat made by Franklin Pierce and his associates. There's one more thing you need to know. Harold Sullivan didn't just disappear. I was at his mansion the night it happened in July 17, 1979. Sullivan had called me to check his car before a trip to the state capitol where he planned to deliver evidence against Pierce. While I was working, Pierce arrived with Sheriff Knox and Everett. They didn't see me beneath the car. The argument was heated. Pierce demanded documents. Sullivan refused. I heard a gunshot, then silence. I fled like a coward, told myself it wasn't my business. 3 days later, the official story circulated: Sullivan had left town after losing the election. His car was found at the bus station. No body was ever recovered. I've carried this knowledge like a stone in my chest for decades. Now it's yours. Do what I couldn't finish what Sullivan started. But be smarter than he was. Be careful. Trust no one in Red Hollow. I've always been proud of you, Lena. You've got more courage than I ever did. Whatever you decide to do with this information, know that I believe in you. All my love, Grandpa Frank. Lena sat in her truck outside the post office, the letter trembling in her hands, tears flowing freely now. Her grandfather hadn't just been a witness to corruption, he'd witnessed murder. Mayor Pierce had killed Harold Sullivan, and Frank Marshall had carried that knowledge in silence for 40 years, collecting evidence, preparing for the day someone would finally bring justice. That someone was now her. She carefully repacked the notebooks, securing them in her truck, before driving not to the garage or the mansion, but directly out of town. She needed a secure location to call Mira away from prying eyes and potential surveillance. 10 miles outside Red Hollow, she pulled onto a scenic overlook and dialed the reporter's number. Mira answered on the first ring. I've been trying to reach you. We need to talk now. Things have accelerated. Mira's voice was tight with urgency. I found my grandmother's records, Lena replied. Decades of documentation. And Mira, he witnessed Sullivan's murder. Pierce shot him in the mansion in 1979. A sharp intake of breath from the other end. That changes everything. I've got the cassette tape digitized. It's exactly what Sullivan claimed Pierce confessing to the fraud scheme. With your grandfather's testimony about the murder, we can take them home, all of them. Yes, but it's more complicated now. Mira's voice lowered. Pierce has accelerated his timeline. There's a town council meeting tonight to approve his heritage restoration initiative. It includes emergency powers to seize properties deemed historically significant but at risk of degradation. It's clearly aimed at your mansion. Lena's grip tightened on the steering wheel. Can they do that? Normally, no. But Red Hollow's town charter has unusual provisions for emergency powers. If the council unanimously approves, and every council member is in Pierce's pocket, exactly. Once approved, they could legally seize the property within 48 hours. We need more time to build the case properly, get state authorities involved. Lena thought quickly. The vote has to be unanimous. According to the charter, yes. Then we need to sway just one council member. Break Pierce's united front. Risky, Mira cautioned. Anyone who opposes Pierce publicly puts themselves in danger. Maybe we don't need public opposition, just private doubt. An idea was forming in Lena's mind. When's the meeting? 7 tonight at Town Hall. I'll be there. Meanwhile, how quickly can you get your story ready to publish if needed? 24 hours for the basic version with solid evidence. Another day to include your grandfather's testimony and build the full case. Be ready for either timeline. If I can delay the vote, we go with the complete story. If not, we may need to publish what we have immediately and deal with the consequences. After ending the call, Lena drove to the public library in Clayton Ridge, where she was less likely to be recognized. Using their computers, she researched the Red Hollow Town Council members, looking for vulnerabilities, pressure points, anything that might break their loyalty to Pierce. 4 of the 5 were obvious lost causes, longtime Pierce allies with financial ties to his various enterprises. But the 5th, Eleanor Winters, was newer to the council, elected just 2 years ago on a platform of environmental conservation. Her family had owned a small nature preserve that bordered Red Hollow's watershed, precisely the kind of property that would be threatened by the development Pierce had planned along the new highway route. Did Eleanor know what the Heritage Initiative would ultimately lead to? Or was she a useful pawn, providing environmental credibility to Pierce's scheme? Lena dug deeper into public records, looking for connections between Winters and the Pierce family. Nothing obvious emerged, but she did find something interesting before joining the council. Eleanor had spearheaded opposition to a smaller development project that would have impacted the watershed near her family's preserve. The project had mysteriously been canceled after she dropped her protest and instead ran for council with Pierce's endorsement. It had all the hallmarks of a classic Pierce operation: threaten someone's interests, then offer protection in exchange for loyalty. But such loyalty built on coercion rather than true allegiance might be fragile. With a plan forming, Lena drove to the address listed for Eleanor Winters, a modest home on the edge of town, backing up to protected forest land. She arrived to find Eleanor working in a garden of native plants that covered her front yard, her hands deep in soil, gray-streaked hair pulled back in a practical braid. "Ms. Winters," Lena approached cautiously. "My name is Lena Marshall. I was hoping I might speak with you privately." The woman straightened, studying Lena with clear intelligence. "Frank's granddaughter, the one who bought Sullivan's old place." It wasn't a question. "I've been expecting someone from the Pierce camp to visit. Didn't think it would be you." "I'm not with Pierce," Lena said firmly. "Quite the opposite." Eleanor's expression revealed nothing, but she gestured toward her porch. 10 minutes. That's all I can spare before I need to prepare for tonight's meeting." Once seated in mismatched wicker chairs, Eleanor spoke first. "I know why you're here. The Heritage Initiative vote. You want me to oppose it." "I want you to understand what you're really voting for," Lena corrected. "The initiative isn't about preserving Red Hollow's heritage. It's about seizing control of strategic properties before the highway project breaks ground." A flicker of surprise crossed Eleanor's features. "The highway plans aren't public knowledge yet." "No, but Pierce has known about them since the 1970s. That's why he and his associates have been systematically acquiring land along the projected route through fraud, forgery, and intimidation for decades." Lena leaned forward. "Including threatening the watershed that feeds your family's nature preserve." Eleanor's composure cracked slightly. How do you know about that? The same way I know Pierce offered to protect your preserve if you joined the council and supported his initiatives. The same way I know Harold Sullivan wasn't the only person who died trying to expose Pierce's crimes. Silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken truths. Finally, Eleanor sighed, seeming to age years in moments. What exactly do you want from me, Ms. Marshall? Just a delay. Vote to postpone the Heritage Initiative decision for 1 week, citing the need for environmental impact studies. 1 week, that's all. You don't understand what you're asking. Pierce doesn't tolerate opposition. My family's legacy, will be destroyed anyway once the highway development begins, Lena finished gently. The protection he offered is temporary. Once the larger project is approved, your preserve will be deemed necessary for infrastructure support or some other bureaucratic designation. You've just bought yourself a few extra years. Eleanor stared at her garden conflict evident in her expression. You have proof of all this? In answer, Lena retrieved one of her grandfather's notebooks from her truck and opened it to an entry from 3 years prior, a detailed account of a conversation between Pierce and the county water commissioner about rerouting the watershed that fed Eleanor's preserve once the highway project began. As Eleanor read, her hands began to tremble. Frank heard this, documented it. My grandfather documented everything for 40 years. The case against Pierce is being prepared as we speak. All I need is time 1 week for the full investigation to complete. Your vote to delay can provide that time. Eleanor closed the notebook carefully. If what you're saying is true, a vote against Pierce is signing my own destruction. A vote for him guarantees it, Lena countered. At least this way, there's a chance for justice. When Lena left Eleanor's house, she had no firm commitment, just a troubled expression and a promise to consider all facets of the proposal carefully. It wasn't much, but it was something, a crack in Pierce's wall of control. As evening approached, Lena prepared for the council meeting. She chose her clothing deliberately, her grandfather's jacket over a plain black shirt, work boots polished but still obviously functional. She wanted to present herself as what she was, a working-class woman with deep roots in the community, not an outside agitator. The town hall was packed when she arrived, the atmosphere charged with anticipation. Mayor Pearson Everett sat at the raised council table alongside the 5 council members, including Eleanor Winters, whose face revealed nothing of their earlier conversation. Lena found a seat in the back, deliberately visible but not confrontational. As the meeting progressed through routine matters, she noted the strategic placement of Sheriff Denton and 2 deputies near the exits. Pierce was leaving nothing to chance. Finally, the mayor brought up the Heritage Restoration Initiative, his voice resonating with practiced sincerity as he detailed the benefits to the community: preservation of historic structures, tourism opportunities, celebration of Red Hollow's rich past. The presentation was masterful, appealing to civic pride while carefully avoiding specifics about which properties would be targeted or how they would be acquired. When he finished, Pierce turned to the council. I believe we're ready for a vote on this important measure for our community's future. Councilors, 4 hands raised immediately in support. Only Eleanor Winters hesitated, her expression troubled. The room grew silent, tension building as all eyes fixed on the lone holdout. Councilor Winters, Pierce prompted, his smile never wavering, though his eyes had hardened. Your vote? Eleanor's gaze found Lena briefly before returning to the mayor. I have concerns about the environmental impact assessments. The initiative mentions renovations to several properties in watershed protection zones. Before voting, I'd like to see proper studies conducted. Pierce's smile tightened imperceptibly. I assure you all necessary environmental considerations have been addressed in the planning documents. With respect, Mayor, I haven't seen those specific assessments. I propose we postpone the vote for 1 week to allow for proper review. The mayor's facade cracked slightly, a flash of anger, quickly controlled. This initiative has been under development for months, Councilor. Your concerns, while appreciated, seem rather last minute. Nevertheless, they are valid concerns that require addressing before I can, in good conscience, vote to approve such sweeping powers. Eleanor's voice strengthened with each word. I move to table this matter until next week's meeting. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Pierce conferred briefly with Everett, their expressions grim. Finally, the mayor addressed the room with strained civility. While disappointed by this unexpected delay, I respect the council's process. The vote on the Heritage Restoration Initiative will be postponed until next week's meeting. His gaze found Lena in the crowd, cold with undisguised hostility. I trust all concerns will be thoroughly addressed by then. The meeting adjourned shortly after the crowd dispersing with an undercurrent of confused speculation. Lena remained seated watching as Pierce engaged Eleanor in what appeared to be an intense conversation, his hand gripping her arm just a little too tightly to be friendly. When Eleanor finally extracted herself and headed for the exit, Lena followed at a discreet distance. In the parking lot, she caught up to the counselor, who was fumbling with her car keys, hands shaking visibly. "Are you all right?" Lena asked quietly. Eleanor laughed, a brittle sound with no humor. "All right, I've just painted a target on my back. Pierce has threatened to call for an environmental audit of my family's preserve, looking for possible violations that would revoke our protected status. We just need to hold out for 1 week. By then, the full story will break, and Pierce will be facing criminal charges." "A week is a lifetime when you've crossed Franklin Pierce." Eleanor finally managed to unlock her car. "He's not a man who forgives opposition, Ms. Marshall. You should understand that before this goes any further." "I understand perfectly. My grandfather spent 40 years understanding it." Lena touched the woman's arm gently. "Thank you for your courage tonight." Eleanor shook her head. "It wasn't courage, just the realization that I was damned either way." She climbed into her car. "Be careful going home." After that meeting, I wouldn't put anything past them. The warning proved prescient. As Lena drove back to her grandfather's garage, she noticed headlights following at a consistent distance, not trying to catch up, just maintaining surveillance. Instead of leading them to the garage, she took a series of random turns through town and eventually confirming her suspicion when the vehicle, a black SUV similar to those that had searched her property, continued to mirror her movements. She considered her options. Confrontation was risky, potentially escalating a tense situation to violence. Leading them on a prolonged chase would eventually end at either the garage or the mansion, compromising both locations. What she needed was a public place with witnesses somewhere the presence of Pierce's men would be noticed and remembered. Lena drove to the Red Hollow Diner, the town's most popular evening gathering spot. She parked prominently under the bright neon sign and entered the busy establishment, taking a seat at the counter where she was visible through the large front windows. The SUV parked across the street, its occupants watching but unwilling to follow her into the crowded diner. Lena ordered coffee and pie, engaging the waitress in casual conversation, establishing her presence among multiple witnesses. After 30 minutes, she paid her bill and left, nodding politely to Sheriff Denton, who had coincidentally arrived for a late dinner just after she sat down. The surveillance vehicle remained, but now Lena had established a public record of being followed, a fact that would become significant if anything happened to her. She drove directly to the garage, parking her truck inside the service bay and closing the heavy door behind it. Once secure inside her grandfather's apartment, she called Mira to update her on the council meeting and the surveillance. "Pierce is getting desperate," Mira observed. "The delay threatens his timeline. With the highway project announcement scheduled for next month, he needs control of those properties immediately." "How's the investigation proceeding?" Lena asked, checking that all windows were secured. "Better than expected. I've verified most of your grandfather's documentation against public records. The pattern is undeniable once you know what to look for, and the cassette recording is damning. Pierce explicitly discusses forging signatures and bribing officials. Enough for the Attorney General to act. My contact there thinks so, but they want more time to prepare. A case this significant, involving a 40-year conspiracy with a sitting mayor and potentially multiple judges and officials, they want it airtight before moving." "We may not have that luxury," Lena said, describing the surveillance and Pierce's thinly veiled threats to Eleanor. "They're escalating faster than we anticipated." "Then we accelerate too," Mira decided. "I'll work through the night, get the basic story ready to publish by tomorrow evening if necessary. Meanwhile, we need to secure your grandfather's notebooks. They're too valuable to risk losing." They arranged to meet the following morning at a neutral location midway between their positions. After ending the call, Lena spent hours organizing the notebooks chronologically, making additional copies of the most critical pages. When exhaustion finally overtook her, around 2 a.m., she collapsed onto her grandfather's bed, fully clothed, the documents secured in a fireproof box beneath the floorboards. The crash of breaking glass jolted her awake. Smoke filled the apartment, acrid and thick. Lena rolled from the bed onto the floor, staying low as flames licked up the curtains and across the worn carpet. The fire was spreading with unnatural speed, suggesting an accelerant had been used. She grabbed the fireproof box and her phone, then crawled toward the back staircase that led directly outside. The heat was intense, the smoke disorienting. As she reached the stairs, a section of ceiling collapsed behind her, blocking her return to the main apartment. Outside, the night air was shocking after the superheated interior. Lena stumbled away from the building, watching in horror as flames engulfed the garage that had been her grandfather's life's work, her childhood sanctuary, and most recently, her refuge. The fire had been set professionally, multiple points of origin's accelerant, used to ensure complete destruction, timed for the deepest part of night when response would be slowest. This wasn't vandalism or intimidation. This was attempted murder. Lena retreated to her truck, parked a safe distance from the burning building. By the time fire trucks arrived, the structure was beyond saving. Sheriff Denton appeared shortly after, his expression unreadable as he approached her. "Terrible accident," he commented, watching the firefighters battle the hopeless blaze. "Lots of flammable materials in auto shops. All it takes is one spark." "This wasn't an accident," Lena replied coldly. "This was arson." "Bold accusation. Got any proof?" "Multiple points of origin, accelerant use, middle of the night when I'm sleeping inside, immediately after I opposed Pierce at the council meeting." She met his gaze directly. "Draw your own conclusion, Sheriff." Denton's expression hardened. "Careful, Miss Marshall. Accusing prominent citizens without evidence is slander. Then investigate, take samples. Do your job." "Oh, I'll investigate," he assured her, voice low. "But if I were you, I'd consider whether rebuilding here is worth the trouble. Some might take this as a sign it's time to move on." The threat couldn't have been clearer. As Denton walked away, Lena realized the stakes had escalated beyond property and politics. Pierce was now willing to kill to protect his secrets, just as he had with Harold Sullivan 40 years earlier. She retreated to her truck, driving out of town as the first light of dawn broke over the mountains. The meeting with Mira couldn't come soon enough. They needed to accelerate their timeline dramatically. Their lives likely depended on it. The rendezvous point was a highway rest area 40 miles from Red Hollow, chosen for its open visibility and constant traffic. Lena arrived first, positioning her truck to observe all approaches. When Mira's sedan pulled in 30 minutes later, Lena performed a careful scan of the surrounding area before approaching. Mira's expression turned to alarm when she saw Lena's soot-stained clothing and the angry red marks on her face from smoke exposure. "My God, what happened?" Pierce's answer to Eleanor's delayed vote. Lena handed over the fireproof box containing her grandfather's notebooks. "They burned down my grandfather's garage with me inside. I barely got out. We need to get you to a hospital." "No, no hospitals, no official reports, not yet." Lena's voice was raw from smoke. "They're watching everything. We publish now today before they make another attempt." Mira hesitated, then nodded grimly. "I've been working through the night. The core story is ready: land fraud, documentation of the conspiracy, the tape recording. I can add the arson attempt and rush it online by this afternoon." "Do it, and contact your sources in the Attorney General's office. Tell them we're publishing with or without their approval." They finalized details quickly. Mira would publish on her news outlet's website by 3 p.m., simultaneously sending the full evidence package to state and federal authorities. Lena would return to the mansion to retrieve the remaining evidence she'd hidden there, then meet Mira at a safe house arranged through the reporter's law enforcement contacts. "Once this breaks, Pierce will be cornered," Mira warned. "That makes him most dangerous. Are you sure about going back to the mansion? There's documentation hidden there that ties directly to Sullivan's murder. My grandfather's testimony about what he witnessed that night. We need it to ensure Pierce faces the most serious charges. At least wait until the story publishes. Once it's public, he'll be under scrutiny." Lena shook her head. "That scrutiny works both ways. Once he knows we've gone public, he'll destroy everything he can reach, including whatever's still hidden in that house." They parted with a plan to reconnect after the story published. Lena drove not directly to the mansion, but to Eleanor Winter's home, needing to warn the counselor about the escalating danger. She found the house silent. Eleanor's car gone from the driveway. A neighbor working in his yard provided the explanation. Eleanor left early this morning, said she needed a few days away after some family emergency. Seemed in quite a hurry. Pierce had already moved to isolate and neutralize his opposition. Whether Eleanor had fled of her own accord or been coerced into leaving remained unclear, but her absence confirmed the mayor was actively eliminating obstacles before the next council vote. Time was running critically short. Lena drove toward the Sullivan mansion, taking a circuitous route to identify any surveillance. The roads appeared clear, but that only increased her unease. After the fire, Pierce's men should be watching her every move. Their absence suggested either a tactical withdrawal or, more worryingly, concentration of forces elsewhere. The mansion came into view as she rounded the final curve, its stone facade gleaming in the midday sun. Everything appeared normal, peaceful, even with no vehicles visible on the property. Lena parked at the end of the driveway and approached cautiously, every sense alert for danger. The front door stood slightly ajar, her first warning that something was wrong. She had locked it securely during her last visit. Drawing the small canister of pepper spray she now carried, Lena pushed the door open wider and entered the foyer. Evidence of a search was immediately apparent. Furniture, overturned drawers emptied onto floors, even sections of drywall torn open to reveal the spaces between studs. They had been thorough, methodical in their destruction, looking for anything she might have hidden. Lena moved deeper into the house toward the hidden study where the trapdoor to the basement was located. The rotating bookcase stood open, no longer concealing the secret passage. Beyond the study had been similarly ransacked, books pulled from shelves, floorboards pried up, even the ornate desk reduced to splintered pieces. The Persian rug had been thrown aside, revealing the trapdoor which stood open. Lena descended cautiously into the basement, finding similar devastation. The filing cabinets lay on their sides, emptied of contents. The walls had been stripped to bare studs, in places the hidden compartment where she'd found Sullivan's evidence ripped open and empty. They had found everything, or so they believed. What they didn't know was that Lena had created her own hiding place during her performative renovation days earlier. Behind a false electrical panel she had installed near the basement stairs lay her grandfather's handwritten account of Sullivan's murder, along with copies of the most damning evidence linking Pierce directly to the crime. She retrieved the hidden documents, securing them inside her jacket before ascending the stairs. As she reached the main floor, a voice froze her in place. "Impressive persistence, Ms. Marshall. Most people would have gotten the message by now." Everett Pierce stood in the center of the ransacked study, impeccably dressed despite the destruction surrounding him. Unlike previous encounters, he made no attempt to maintain a facade of civility. His expression was cold, calculating, the mask of the politician fully dropped to reveal the predator beneath. "Your father murdered Harold Sullivan in this house," Lena stated flatly, her hand tightening around the pepper spray concealed in her pocket. "My grandfather witnessed it. You've spent 40 years covering up the crime." Interesting theory, unprovable of course, since Franklin Pierce was at a public town meeting that evening with dozens of witnesses. Everett smiled thinly. "As for your grandfather, a man with a history of memory problems in his later years, hardly a reliable witness. The land fraud is provable. Documents, recordings, 4 decades of evidence that's already in the hands of state authorities." Something flickered in Everett's eyes, uncertainty, perhaps even fear, quickly masked. "Documents can be forged, recordings manipulated, and authorities persuaded to look elsewhere. You've drastically overestimated your position, Ms. Marshall." He took a step closer, his voice lowering confidentially. "Unlike my father, I've always preferred practical solutions to problems. The garage fire was regrettable but necessary. Your continued resistance forces a more permanent resolution." Lena backed toward the doorway. "You won't get away with this. The story breaks today with or without me." "Perhaps, but a story without its primary witness has considerably less impact." Everett reached into his jacket, revealing a glimpse of a holstered weapon. "You should have taken the offer for the property. Now I'm afraid the negotiations have concluded." The sound of vehicles approaching outside provided momentary distraction. Everett glanced toward the window, his concentration broken for a critical second. Lena seized the opportunity, spraying the pepper spray directly into his face before bolting from the room. Everett's agonized shout followed her as she raced down the hidden corridor and into the main hallway. The front door was no longer an option. Voices outside indicated multiple arrivals. Instead, she headed for the back of the house toward the kitchen with its access to the rear gardens. As she burst through the kitchen door onto the stone patio, she collided with a solid figure, Sheriff Denton, his hand already moving toward his service weapon. "Going somewhere, Ms. Marshall." Behind her, Everett's pained voice called out, "She's armed, attacked me." Denton's hand closed around her arm with bruising force. "That's assaulting a public official, serious charge. I'll need to take you into custody." "He threatened to kill me," Lena protested, trying to break free. "This is all part of the cover-up. Save it for your statement." Denton began forcing her toward a waiting patrol car. "You have the right to remain silent." As the Miranda warning continued, Lena's mind raced through limited options. Once in police custody, she would be entirely at Pierce's mercy. Evidence would disappear, witnesses would recant, and she would likely meet the same fate as Harold Sullivan, another disappearance in Red Hollow's troubled history. Her salvation came from an unexpected source. As Denton pushed her toward the patrol car, a convoy of unmarked vehicles roared up the driveway, blocking their path. Men and women in suits emerged, several displaying badges. "Sheriff Denton," called an authoritative voice. "I'm Special Agent Mercer, FBI. Release Ms. Marshall immediately. She's a protected witness in a federal investigation." Denton froze, his grip loosening slightly. "This is a local matter. Woman assaulted a town official." "This is now a federal matter involving multiple jurisdictions," the agent interrupted, approaching with purposeful strides. "Our office received substantial evidence of a decades-long criminal conspiracy centered in this county. Evidence that names you, Sheriff, as a participant." More agents were securing the area, several moving to intercept Everett Pierce, who had emerged from the mansion, still wiping at his streaming eyes. "Mira Delgado's contact in the Attorney General's office," Lena realized aloud. "You move faster than expected." Agent Mercer nodded slightly. "Ms. Delgado provided compelling initial evidence. Combined with an attempted murder by arson last night and reports of an imminent threat to a federal witness, we expedited our response." Denton's hand had moved to his weapon, his expression darkening as options diminished. "This is Pierce jurisdiction. You have no authority." "Step away from the witness, Sheriff," Mercer stated firmly, her own weapon now visible. "Don't compound 40 years of corruption with a decision you won't survive." For a tense moment, Denton seemed to weigh his chances. Then with a muttered curse, he released Lena's arm and stepped back, raising his hand slowly. Agent Mercer guided Lena toward the federal vehicles. "Ms. Delgado is waiting at our field office. She's preparing to publish the story within the hour once we've secured all primary witnesses." As they drove away, Lena watched through the rear window as agents placed Everett Pierce and Sheriff Denton in separate vehicles. The Sullivan mansion receded in the distance, its stone walls still standing strong despite decades of secrets and violence within. For the first time since discovering the hidden basement, Lena allowed herself to believe that justice might finally come to Red Hollow, that her grandfather's silent vigilance and Sullivan's doomed courage would not have been in vain. The machinery of justice, so long stalled by corruption and fear, had finally begun to turn. The federal field office hummed with controlled chaos, agents moving with a purpose, phones ringing, voices conferring in rapid-clipped tones. Lena sat in a sparse conference room, hands wrapped around a paper cup of mediocre coffee, watching Mira Delgado pace along the windows. Beyond the glass partition, teams of federal agents processed the evidence. They'd brought her grandfather's notebooks, Sullivan's hidden documents, the microcassette recording that had started it all. "Story goes live in 20 minutes, Mira announced, checking her watch. "Editor's just doing final legal review. Once it publishes, every news outlet in the state will pick it up within hours." Lena nodded, her voice still raw from smoke inhalation. "What about Pierce? Has he been arrested?" "Not yet. They're building the case methodically, securing warrants for all of his properties and accounts." Mira paused, her pacing. "They need to ensure everything is procedurally perfect. A case this significant, involving this many officials, they can't risk any technical errors that might compromise prosecution. Meanwhile, he's free to destroy evidence, intimidate witnesses." "Not free exactly." Agent Mercer entered, setting a tablet on the table. "Mayor Pierce and his son are under continuous surveillance. Their communications are monitored, their movements tracked. They know we're watching, which limits their options considerably." The agent tapped the tablet screen, bringing up surveillance photos of the Pierce residence. Franklin Pierce hasn't left his home since our operation at the Sullivan Mansion. He's called an emergency town council meeting for this evening, obviously trying to consolidate support before the story breaks. With Eleanor Winters conveniently absent, Lena noted. Ms. Winters is safe, Mercer assured her. She contacted our office early this morning after receiving threats. She's currently in protective custody preparing a formal statement about Pierce's coercion of council members. Relief washed through Lena. At least Eleanor had escaped whatever fate Pierce had planned for her. What about my grandfather's garage, the arson investigation? Forensic teams are processing the scene now. Preliminary findings already confirm accelerant use at multiple points of origin. Combined with the timing and your testimony, it creates a compelling connection to the larger conspiracy. Mercer's phone buzzed. She checked it, then looked up with grim satisfaction. Search teams at Pierce's home office just discovered shredding in progress. Documents related to land transactions dating back to the 1970s. That's destruction of evidence during an active federal investigation gives us grounds for immediate arrest. The agent excused herself, leaving Lena and Mira to absorb this development. After so many decades of impunity, the Pierce empire was finally crumbling. Justice that had seemed impossible just days earlier was now unfolding with the inexorable momentum of a landslide. It doesn't feel real, Lena murmured. After everything they did, my grandfather's accident, Sullivan's murder, all those stolen properties, it can't be this simple. Simple? Mira raised an eyebrow. You nearly died in that fire. You faced down armed men in a remote mansion. You uncovered a 40-year conspiracy single-handedly. None of this was simple, Lena. You know what I mean? All those years, Pierce seemed untouchable above the law. Now suddenly, federal agents are arresting him for shredding papers. That's how it often works with men like Pierce. Mira observed, resuming her seat across from Lena. They build these elaborate criminal enterprises, control entire communities through fear and manipulation, think themselves invulnerable, then fall because of something seemingly minor. Al Capone went down for tax evasion, not murder. The conference room door opened again, this time admitting a distinguished older man in a tailored suit followed by Agent Mercer. The newcomer's presence commanded immediate attention, his bearing suggesting significant authority. Ms. Marshall, Ms. Delgado, this is U.S. Attorney Richard Harmon. He'll be overseeing the federal prosecution of the Pierce case. Harmon shook their hands with precise formality. First, let me thank you both for your extraordinary courage. What you've uncovered represents one of the most extensive corruption schemes I've encountered in 30 years of practice. He sat at the head of the conference table, arranging documents before him with methodical precision. I've reviewed the preliminary evidence. The land fraud alone spans 4 decades in 3 counties. The financial implications are staggering: properties acquired fraudulently and resold at massive profits, tax evasion, misappropriation of public funds. And murder, Lena interjected firmly. Harold Sullivan's murder has to be part of the prosecution. Harmon's expression tightened slightly. That presents greater challenges. While your grandfather's testimony is compelling, it's also hearsay from a deceased witness. The statute of limitations doesn't apply to murder, Mira interrupted, and concealment of a crime extends the statute for related offenses. Indeed, however, without physical evidence, a body, the murder weapon, contemporaneous documentation of the crime itself, proving murder beyond reasonable doubt becomes problematic. Harmon spread his hands. I'm not dismissing the charge. I'm preparing you for the reality that the financial crimes may ultimately prove more prosecutable. The conversation was interrupted by Mira's phone chiming. She checked it, then looked up with grim satisfaction. It's live. Story just published. She turned her tablet toward them, displaying the headline, Decades of Corruption Exposed Red Hollow Mayor-Built Criminal Empire on Forged Deeds, Coercion, and Murder. The article laid out the entire conspiracy in devastating detail: the systematic theft of land through fraudulent means, the strategic acquisition of properties along the planned highway route, the suppression of opposition through intimidation and violence, and finally the suspected murder of former Mayor Harold Sullivan in 1979. Accompanying the text were copies of key documents, photographs of the Sullivan Mansion's hidden evidence room, and most damning of all, a transcript of the recorded conversation where Pierce explicitly discussed forging property deeds and bribing officials. Comprehensive work. Harmon acknowledged, scanning the article. This will generate significant public pressure for accountability. Agent Mercer's phone rang. After a brief conversation, she announced, Mayor Pierce and Everett Pierce are both being taken into custody now. Destruction of evidence charges to start, with more to follow as the investigation progresses. A weight seemed to lift from Lena's shoulders, a tension she'd carried since first discovering the hidden basement. After 40 years of silence and fear, Franklin Pierce would finally face justice for his crimes. His empire of corruption, built on stolen land and broken lives, was collapsing around him. What happens now, she asked. For the Pierce family, a cascade of legal consequences, Harmon replied. Federal charges for the land fraud scheme, state charges for related crimes, civil suits from victims seeking restitution. The financial penalties alone will likely be ruinous. And for me, protection for as long as necessary. Your testimony will be crucial in the coming months. The Pierce organization is extensive associates in local government, business connections, possibly even state-level officials. Dismantling it completely will take time. Lena nodded, the reality of her new circumstances settling in. She wasn't just a witness. She was now the public face of opposition to a powerful criminal enterprise. Her life had irrevocably changed the moment she'd turned that brass handle and descended into Sullivan's basement. There's something else to consider, Mira added gently. The victims' families who lost land, livelihoods, who were intimidated into silence for decades. They'll be coming forward now, looking for answers for justice. Many will need help navigating the legal process of reclaiming what was stolen from them. The observation resonated deeply. Throughout this ordeal, Lena had focused primarily on exposing Pierce's crimes, on securing justice for her grandfather and Harold Sullivan. But the conspiracy had claimed countless other victims, over 4 decades, ordinary people who had suffered in silence, believing themselves alone against insurmountable power. I want to help them, she said with sudden certainty. They deserve more than just headlines and court cases. They deserve to reclaim what was taken, to have their stories acknowledged. Harmon studied her with newfound respect. That's an admirable intention, Ms. Marshall. Perhaps once the immediate security concerns are addressed. No, Lena interrupted, an idea crystallizing. Not later, now. These people have waited 40 years for justice. They shouldn't have to wait any longer. Over the following hours, as federal agents processed the Pierces into custody and search teams continued gathering evidence from multiple properties, Lena's idea evolved into a concrete plan. The Sullivan Mansion, the physical epicenter of the conspiracy, the place where evidence had been hidden and where Harold Sullivan had likely died, would become a resource center for victims of the Pierce organization. The symbolism alone is powerful, Mira acknowledged as they refined the concept, transforming the site of corruption into a center for healing and justice. By evening, as news of the arrest spread throughout Red Hollow and neighboring communities, Lena's phone began ringing with calls from strangers, people who had read Mira's article and recognized their own experiences in the pattern of fraud and intimidation described. An elderly couple whose farm had been seized through falsified tax liens in 1982. A middle-aged woman whose parents had lost their business after opposing a Pierce development project in the 90s. A former county clerk who had been fired and blacklisted after questioning document irregularities. Each call strengthened Lena's resolve. These weren't just abstract victims of a complex financial scheme. They were real people with stories of loss, fear, and helplessness against a corrupt system that had seemed unassailable. 3 days after the arrest, with the Pierces denied bail due to flight risk and the federal investigation expanding to include several judges and county officials, Lena returned to the Sullivan Mansion. Federal agents had completed their evidence collection, though the house remained under surveillance for her protection. The destruction from Pierce's men's search remained: upended furniture, damaged walls, the violated hidden study. But rather than restoring the mansion to its original state, Lena began a different kind of renovation. The hidden study, once a secret repository of evidence, would become a public research room where victims could access records relevant to their cases. The grand dining room would transform into a meeting space for legal consultations and support groups. Mira, who had remained in Red Hollow to follow the developing story, arrived to find Lena clearing debris from the foyer. "You're actually going through with it," she observed, helping move a broken chair. "Turning this place into a resource center." "It feels right," Lena replied, using the physical space where it all happened to help heal the damage Pierce caused. Need a hand? My editor's given me extended leave to cover this story. I could help with organization documentation. Journalist skills transfer surprisingly well to archival work. Together they spent the next week transforming the mansion. As news of the project spread, others began to appear, volunteers offering labor furniture expertise. A retired legal secretary organized document systems for tracking claims. A contractor who had once refused to work for Pierce provided materials and crew to repair damaged walls. Most significantly, Dean Talbot arrived with boxes of his own records, decades of notes and documents from his truncated investigation years earlier. Never thought I'd see the day the former sheriff admitted surveying the activity in what had once been Sullivan's secret basement. Pierce actually facing justice, this place becoming something good. It wouldn't have happened without your help, Linavant reminded him. You believed me when no one else would. Your grandfather would be proud, Dean said quietly. This is what he wanted all along, the truth coming out, people getting back what was stolen from them. 10 days after the arrest, the Red Hollow Community Justice Center officially opened in the Sullivan Mansion. The timing proved crucial as state and federal investigators had begun the complex process of untangling Pierce's decades of fraudulent property transactions. Families arrived with faded deeds, old photographs, handwritten accounts of properties lost through suspicious means. Volunteer lawyers helped them prepare claims for restitution. Support groups formed organically as victims discovered shared experiences, their isolation finally broken. Lena moved through these gatherings like a conductor, connecting people with resources, listening to stories, ensuring every visitor felt heard and valued. She had discovered an unexpected talent for organization and leadership, born from her mechanic's instinct for identifying problems and methodically resolving them. You found your calling, Mira observed one evening as they reviewed the day's progress. This isn't just about justice anymore. You're rebuilding an entire community that Pierce fractured. I'm fixing what's broken, Lena replied simply. It's what I've always done. As the federal case against the Pierces progressed, the center's work expanded. Title researchers uncovered patterns of fraud extending beyond Red Hollow to neighboring counties. Property records were meticulously compared against original documents, revealing dozens of forged signatures and falsified transfers. 1 month after the center's opening, Lena received an unexpected visit from U.S. Attorney Harmon. He arrived without entourage, appearing genuinely impressed by the operation she had established. Remarkable work, Ms. Marshall. You've accomplished more in weeks than my office might have in months. He studied the wall maps where identified fraudulent properties had been marked with colored pins. Your organizational system has actually aided our prosecution substantially. We're motivated, Lena replied. These people have waited decades for justice. That's why I'm here. We've reached a critical juncture in the case against Franklin Pierce. Harmon's expression grew serious. As you know, proving the murder of Harold Sullivan remains our greatest challenge, lacking physical evidence. However, your grandfather's testimony about witnessing the shooting has created enough concern that we've obtained permission to conduct a thorough search of the property using ground-penetrating radar and cadaver dogs. Lena absorbed this with mixed emotions. The prospect of finding Sullivan's remains was both disturbing and potentially crucial for justice. You think he's buried here on the property? It's a strong possibility. Your grandfather's account indicates Sullivan was shot inside the house. Moving a body off-site would have created additional risk of discovery. Pierce owned the property and could control access, preventing accidental discovery for decades. The search began the following day, methodical, scientific, respectful of both the ongoing community work and the somber possibility of what might be found. Ground-penetrating radar technicians systematically scanned the 12 acres surrounding the mansion, while specialized dogs worked specific areas of interest. On the second day, both technologies indicated anomalies in the same location, beneath an ornamental stone garden structure, approximately 50 yards from the main house. The gazebo, built of the same native stone as the mansion, appeared to date from the original construction. Perfect hiding place, Dean Talbot observed grimly as technicians prepared the site for excavation. Heavy stone foundation, decorative purpose that wouldn't raise questions, location visible from the house so Pierce could monitor it. The excavation proceeded with painstaking care, archaeologists and forensic specialists documenting each layer. By mid-afternoon, they had reached a depth of approximately 4 feet when one of the technicians called for a halt. Brushing away soil with delicate strokes, she revealed what was unmistakably human remains. Work immediately shifted to full forensic recovery protocols. Lena watched from a respectful distance as the team systematically exposed and documented what appeared to be a complete skeleton. Near the remains, they recovered a tarnished mayoral lapel pin, a gold watch, and most significantly, a wallet containing Harold Sullivan's driver's license and identification. "It's him," Agent Mercer confirmed quietly, joining Lena at the perimeter. "Preliminary examination indicates a gunshot wound to the skull consistent with your grandfather's testimony." The discovery transformed the prosecution's approach. What had been a case primarily focused on financial crimes now centered on first-degree murder. State prosecutors joined the federal team, filing homicide charges against Franklin Pierce. Everett Pierce faced conspiracy and accessory charges based on evidence of his involvement in the decades-long cover-up. For Lena, the discovery brought complex emotions: vindication for her grandfather's long-silenced testimony, satisfaction that Sullivan would receive proper burial in recognition, but also profound sadness that his life had ended violently in this place she now called home. The mansion itself seemed changed by the discovery, its secrets finally exposed to daylight. The weight of hidden history lifted. As Sullivan's remains were respectfully removed for formal forensic examination, Lena felt the property exhale as if released from a long-held breath. 2 days later, she stood on the front porch, watching the sunrise illuminate the stone facade, thinking about the mansion's journey from symbol of corruption to center for healing. A car approaching the driveway interrupted her contemplation. A silver sedan she didn't recognize, moving slowly as if its driver was uncertain. The vehicle parked, and an elderly woman emerged, tall and straight-backed. Despite her years, her white hair elegantly styled her clothing expensive but conservative. Something in her bearing suggested authority, dignity weathered but unbroken by time. As the woman approached the porch steps, Lena felt a strange certainty about her identity. "Mrs. Sullivan." The woman paused, surprise flickering across her composed features. "Yes, Catherine Sullivan. Harold was my husband." Her gaze moved past Lena to the mansion beyond. "It's been 45 years since I last stood here." "I'm Lena Marshall. Please come in." Lena guided her into the foyer, watching as Catherine Sullivan absorbed the changes to what had once been her home. "They told me what you've done here," Catherine said quietly. "Using Harold's house to help the people Pierce victimized. He would have approved." They settled in what had once been the main living room, now converted to a comfortable meeting space. Catherine's gaze traveled the room, lingering on certain features with the distant look of someone revisiting memories. "I never believed Harold simply left," she said after a long silence. "He wasn't the type to abandon his responsibilities, his community. But in 1979, standing up against someone like Pierce meant standing alone. The authorities wouldn't investigate. The newspapers wouldn't report. I was told to accept the official story and move on with my life." "I'm so sorry," Lena offered inadequate words for such profound injustice. "They've asked me to identify his personal effects." Catherine continued, her composure remarkable given the circumstances. "The watch, the lapel pin, items a wife would recognize." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "As if I would forget the watch I gave him on our 20th anniversary." She reached into her handbag and withdrew a faded photograph, Harold Sullivan standing proudly before the mansion, young and vital, his arm around a much younger Catherine. "This is how I've remembered him all these years. Not as the missing husband, not as the failed mayor who supposedly abandoned his town, but as the man who believed in justice strongly enough to risk everything." Lena studied the photograph, seeing Sullivan not as a historical figure or victim, but as a real person with dreams, principles, love for his wife. "He tried to expose Pierce in 1979. Everything we've accomplished now began with his courage." "And your grandfather's," Catherine added. "They've told me about Frank Marshall's testimony, how he witnessed what happened that night, but was threatened into silence. How he spent decades documenting the conspiracy afterward, preparing for someone to finally bring the truth to light." "That someone was supposed to be me," Lena admitted. "Grandpa Frank raised me to fix broken things. I think he always hoped I'd help fix this broken town someday." Catherine reached across the table and took Lena's hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "You've done more than fix it, my dear. You've transformed it. This house was a tomb for 40 years, not just for Harold, but for the truth itself. You've given it life again, purpose. As they continued talking, Catherine shared stories of her husband, his principles, his humor, his frustration with Pierce's growing corruption in the 1970s. She described the Harold Sullivan that history had nearly forgotten, painting him in human terms, rather than as merely a victim or martyr. When she finally rose to leave several hours later, Catherine paused in the foyer. "There's something I'd like to contribute to your center." Harold kept copies of his mayoral records, meeting minutes, correspondence, development plans from before Pierce took office. They show what Red Hollow might have been without decades of corruption. Perhaps they'll help guide what it still could become. The documents arrived a week later, meticulously preserved records showing Harold Sullivan's vision for ethical, sustainable development of Red Hollow and surrounding areas. Plans that had been abandoned when Pierce seized power, replaced with exploitative schemes designed to enrich a select few at community expense. These historical documents proved invaluable as the center's work evolved beyond immediate justice for fraud victims toward longer-term community healing and redevelopment. With Pierce's corrupt influence removed, Red Hollow faced an uncertain future, but also an unprecedented opportunity to rebuild on ethical foundations. As summer turned to fall, the federal case against the Pierce organization continued expanding. More than 30 individuals ultimately faced charges. Local officials, business associates, even 2 state-level judges implicated in the conspiracy. The financial investigation uncovered offshore accounts containing millions in illicit profits from the decades of land fraud. In October, 3 months after his arrest, Franklin Pierce accepted a plea agreement, guilty to all financial charges and to second-degree murder in Sullivan's death, in exchange for cooperation identifying additional conspirators and locating hidden assets. The man who had ruled Red Hollow through fear and corruption for 40 years would spend the remainder of his life in federal prison. Everett Pierce, facing his own extensive charges, attempted to distance himself from his father's actions, claiming ignorance of the murder and positioning himself as merely following paternal direction in business matters. This defense collapsed when investigators discovered his fingerprints on documents dating back to Sullivan's disappearance, proving his direct involvement from the beginning. For Lena, these legal developments, while satisfying, had become secondary to the center's evolving mission. What had begun as a resource for fraud victims had expanded into a community revitalization hub where residents envisioned a new future for Red Hollow, one built on transparency, ethical governance, and genuine public service. The property itself continued revealing secrets. During renovation of the East Wing, workers discovered another hidden room containing architectural plans dating to the 1970s, Sullivan's original vision for regional development that would have preserved natural resources while allowing sustainable growth. These plans now formed the foundation for Red Hollow's rebuilding efforts. 6 months after the arrests, on a crisp autumn afternoon, Lena stood on the mansion's wraparound porch, watching volunteers plant native vegetation along the driveway. The property had transformed dramatically. Gardens restored damaged areas, repaired the once forbidding stone facade, now welcoming with fresh paint and warm lighting. Mira joined her camera in hand, documenting the changes for a follow-up story. "Hard to believe this is the same place where you faced down Everett Pierce with only pepper spray for protection." Lena smiled, remembering that desperate moment. "Sometimes I still expect to wake up and find this was all a dream, that Pierce is still mayor, the mansion still abandoned, the truth still buried. Instead, Pierce is in prison, the mansion is a community center, and you're the de facto leader of Red Hollow's renaissance." Mira gestured toward the activity around them. "Not bad for someone who just wanted to renovate an old house." The observation was accurate, if simplified. As Pierce's corrupt administration had collapsed, Red Hollow had found itself in leadership vacuum. An interim town council had been appointed by the county, but real community direction had coalesced organically around the Sullivan Mansion and its resource center. Lena had never sought leadership, had never imagined herself as anything beyond a skilled mechanic with a talent for fixing broken machinery. Yet she had discovered an equally valuable talent for fixing broken systems, for seeing connections between seemingly disparate problems and implementing practical solutions. "I've been thinking about the future," she said, watching volunteers position a bench in what would become a memorial garden for Harold Sullivan. "Not just the center's future, but mine, Red Hollow's." Having second thoughts about staying, Mira asked. The opposite. I'm considering making it official, running for mayor in the special election next spring. Mira studied her with journalist objectivity. It's a natural progression. You've essentially been functioning as town leadership already. The formal title would just acknowledge reality. It would also mean committing to rebuilding this community long-term, giving up my life in Phoenix permanently. Lena's gaze drifted to the garage workshop she'd established on the property smaller than her grandfather's, but equipped with his carefully preserved tools, a connection to her previous identity. I'm not sure I'm qualified to govern a town. You exposed a 40-year conspiracy, faced down murderers, and transformed a center of corruption into a beacon of community healing, Mira pointed out dryly. I'd say that constitutes a reasonable qualification. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Dean Talbot, moving more slowly these days, but still straight-backed with dignity. He carried a cardboard box that he set carefully on the porch swing. Found these while clearing out my storage shed, he explained. Thought they might interest you. Inside the box were newspaper archives, bound volumes of the Red Hollow Gazette, dating back to the 1970s, chronicling the town's transition from Sullivan's administration to Pierce's. Headlines tracked the shift from optimistic community development to increasingly centralized control under Pierce's leadership. History repeating itself, but in reverse this time, Dean observed watching Lena flip through the yellowed pages. Sullivan lost to Pierce in '79, his vision for the town buried with him. Now Pierce is gone and Sullivan's vision is being revived through you. The observation resonated deeply. In many ways, Lena had become the instrument of both Sullivan's and her grandfather's unfinished work, completing the circuit of justice they had begun decades earlier. That evening, after volunteers and visitors had departed, Lena walked the mansion grounds alone. The gazebo where Sullivan's remains had been discovered had been respectfully dismantled. The area transformed into a memorial garden that would be formally dedicated once Catherine Sullivan approved the design. The mansion itself glowed warmly against the twilight sky, its windows illuminated from within, no longer the dark, forbidding structure that had greeted her months earlier. It had been reborn just as Red Hollow itself was being reborn in the aftermath of Pierce's fall. Lena stopped at the spot where she'd first parked her truck on that initial visit, remembering her uncertainty, her naive excitement about renovating a historic property. She could never have imagined then how completely that decision would transform her life, challenging her courage, testing her resilience, ultimately revealing purpose she hadn't known she sought. Her grandfather's voice seemed to whisper on the evening breeze. Sometimes the only way to fix something is to take it completely apart first. See what's broken at the foundation. Red Hollow had been dismantled to its corrupt foundation. Now the rebuilding had begun, not just of physical structures, but of trust community governance itself. The process would take years, perhaps decades, requiring sustained commitment and vision. Lena Marshall, who had once defined herself solely as a mechanic, with grease-stained hands and a talent for fixing engines, now recognized a broader application for her skills. Communities like machines required maintenance attention to failing components, occasional complete overhauls. The principles weren't so different. Identify the problem, disassemble what's broken, replace corrupted parts, rebuild with integrity. The next morning dawned clear in cool autumn colors, painting the landscape surrounding the mansion. Lena arrived early before volunteers and visitors wanting quiet moments to organize the day ahead. She was surprised to find Catherine Sullivan already there, standing in the memorial garden with a small potted tree. Red maple, Catherine explained when Lena approached. Harold planted one just like it when we first moved in, said it would grow with our future here. Her smile held both sadness and peace. It seems fitting to plant another now. Together they dug the hole and positioned the sapling, patting soil around its roots with careful hands. The elderly widow, whose husband had died, trying to protect his community, and the young mechanic who had finally completed his work 4 decades later. I've decided to run for mayor, Lena said, as they finished washing soil from her hands with a garden hose. Try to build the kind of town Harold envisioned. Catherine's eyes brightened. He would have approved, both of the candidate and the vision. She touched the maple sapling gently. Growth takes time, whether for trees or towns. But with proper care, remarkable things can develop from small beginnings. As the day progressed and the center filled with activity, legal consultations, community planning meetings, Support groups for fraud victims. Lena found herself occasionally glancing out windows toward the newly planted maple. Its slender trunk and vibrant leaves seemed almost fragile against the backdrop of the stone mansion, yet it contained the potential for decades of growth and strength. Like Red Hollow itself, the tree would require nurturing protection from harsh elements, steady guidance as it established roots. With proper care, both could flourish, living testaments to resilience, to the possibility of renewal after trauma. In the main meeting room, a planning session for Red Hollow's downtown revitalization was underway. Residents who had once feared speaking publicly under Pierce's regime now enthusiastically shared ideas for rebuilding their community. The energy was palpable, creative, collaborative, hopeful. Lena circulated through the room, listening more than speaking, recognizing that true healing would come not from any single leader, but from restored community engagement. These people had been silenced for generations. Finding their collective voice was essential to preventing future corruption. As afternoon shadows lengthened across the mansion grounds, Lena retreated briefly to her makeshift office, formerly Sullivan's study, now repurposed with a simple desk and comfortable chairs for consultations. On the wall hung a framed photograph, her grandfather standing beside his beloved Camaro, his weathered face beaming with pride at the camera. Beside it hung another photograph, newer Harold and Catherine Sullivan, on their wedding day, their young faces alight with hope for the future they would build together. Catherine had gifted it to the center, saying simply, "This house should remember its original purpose, a home built on love and principles." Between these images of the past, Lena had positioned a large map of Red Hollow and surrounding areas. Red pins marked properties identified in the Pierce fraud scheme, many now in process of being returned to original owners or their descendants. Green pins indicated community projects underway, parks being restored, infrastructure being repaired, civic spaces being reclaimed. The map told a story of transformation, from exploitation to restoration, from corruption to renewal. It visualized the journey from broken to rebuilt, the very process that had defined Lena's life from childhood. A knock at the door interrupted her contemplation. Dean Talbot entered, accompanied by a middle-aged couple Lena hadn't met before. "Lena, these are the Alvarez family," Dean introduced them. "Miguel Jr. and his wife Rosa. Their father's ranch was one of the first properties Pierce seized through forged documents in 1979. Miguel stepped forward, extending his hand. "We've been living in Colorado since my father lost the ranch. Just heard about what's happening here, the center you've created. We're helping families reclaim stolen properties," Lena explained, indicating the map. "Yours would be this parcel here, 200 acres along Coyote Creek." Rosa nodded, emotion evident in her expression. Miguel's father died believing he'd failed his family, that he'd somehow lost their legacy through carelessness. He never knew the documents were forged. "We can help you file for restitution," Lena assured them. "The federal receivers are prioritizing clear cases of fraud, and Sullivan's records specifically mention your father's property." As she guided them through initial paperwork explaining the process for reclaiming their family land, Lena recognized the familiar pattern, another family healing from wounds inflicted decades earlier, another piece of Pierce's corrupt legacy being dismantled and rebuilt with justice. By day's end, as volunteers departed and the center quieted, Lena found herself once again on the wraparound porch, watching sunset paint the stone facade with golden light. In the memorial garden, Catherine Sullivan's maple sapling cast a delicate shadow, its future growth a promise written against the landscape. Dean joined her, settling into a porch chair with the comfortable ease of someone who had earned his rest. "Busy day, productive. Every day brings more families looking to reclaim what they lost," Lena observed. "The Alvarez property makes 46 so far. It'll take years to unravel everything Pierce corrupted," Dean acknowledged. "But that's the nature of healing after decades of damage. No quick fixes." Lena smiled at the terminology so aligned with her mechanic's perspective. "Grandpa Frank always said proper repairs take time. Rushing the process just guarantees you'll be fixing it again later." "Wise man, your grandfather." Dean gazed toward the newly planted maple. "Catherine seems at peace, finding Harold, knowing what really happened. It's allowed her to finally close that chapter." "Some closure for you, too," Lena noted, after 30 years investigating, being dismissed, watching Pierce continue unopposed. Dean nodded thoughtfully. "Justice delayed is still justice, though I wish Frank had lived to see this day." "He did see it," Lena replied with quiet certainty. He prepared for it, documented everything, made sure I'd have access to his records. He knew this day would come eventually. They sat in companionable silence as twilight deepened across the grounds. Lights came on automatically inside the mansion, no longer a dark, abandoned shell, but a welcoming beacon visible from town below. A symbol transformed just as Red Hollow itself was being transformed. "What happens when the Justice Center work is done?" Dean asked eventually. "When the properties are returned, the legal case is resolved. The work evolves," Lena answered without hesitation. "From addressing past wrongs to building a better future." Sullivan had plans for this region, ethical development that balanced growth with conservation, prosperity, with community well-being. Those plans were buried with him, but we've recovered them. They provide a blueprint for what Red Hollow could still become. The concept resonated with her core identity, a mechanic who understood that fixing what's broken sometimes requires reimagining what it could become, seeing potential where others saw only damage. Red Hollow had been systematically broken for 40 years under Pierce's corrupt leadership. Its repair would require more than legal remedies and returned properties. It would demand a new vision, a reimagined purpose. As darkness settled completely, stars appearing in the clear autumn sky, Lena contemplated the strange journey that had brought her here. 6 months earlier, she had been a Phoenix mechanic grieving her grandfather, seeking distraction in a renovation project. Now she stood at the center of a community's rebirth, the unlikeliest of civic leaders, guided by the legacies of two men who had fought corruption in their different ways. The Sullivan Mansion itself had transformed most dramatically from abandoned shell harboring dark secrets to vibrant center for community healing. Its hidden rooms exposed to light, its buried history acknowledged and honored, its purpose reclaimed and expanded. Like the mansion, Red Hollow was experiencing its own renovation structures that had appeared sound, revealing deep corruption beneath painful dismantling, preceding necessary rebuilding, the process simultaneously destructive and creative. The parallels were perfect for a mechanic's understanding of how broken systems must sometimes be completely disassembled before they can be properly repaired. Lena gazed toward town where lights twinkled in the valley below. Pierce's legacy of fear was fading, replaced by cautious hope, renewed community engagement possibilities that had seemed impossible just months earlier. "You know," Dean said, following her gaze toward the town, "when you first showed up at my door with that wild story about hidden rooms and buried evidence, I thought you might be in over your head. Didn't think one person could bring down what Pierce had built over 40 years. "I didn't bring it down alone," Lena corrected. "My grandfather laid the groundwork. Sullivan made the first stand. Mira provided the platform. Federal authorities provided the enforcement. The community is providing the renewal. And you provided the spark," Dean insisted. "The courage to open that trap door knowing what might follow. The determination to face down threats rather than walk away. The vision to transform this place from symbol of corruption to center for healing." The assessment was more credit than Lena felt comfortable claiming, but she recognized its partial truth. She had indeed provided a catalyst, had refused intimidation, had persisted where others might have retreated. Those qualities inherited from her grandfather and honed through years of solving mechanical problems had proven unexpectedly valuable in addressing Red Hollow's systemic failure. "Whatever happens next," Dean continued, "this town owes you a debt it can never fully repay." "I don't want repayment," Lena replied honestly. "I want partnership in rebuilding something worthwhile, something my grandfather would have been proud to see." As if in answer, a gentle breeze stirred the maple sapling in Sullivan's memorial garden, a whisper of movement barely perceptible in the gathering darkness, yet containing the promise of growth to come. The perfect metaphor for Red Hollow itself, damaged but not destroyed, wounded but healing, facing a future that honored its past while building something new from its foundation. Lena Marshall, who had arrived seeking only to fix a broken house, had found instead a broken community in need of the same careful attention, the same methodical repair, the same patient rebuilding. The tools were different, but the principles identical: identify the damage, remove corrupted components, replace with sound materials, restore with integrity. The renovation had only begun. The true transformation of both the mansion and the town it overlooked would unfold over years, perhaps decades. But the foundation had been laid, the structure stabilized, the vision established. For a mechanic who had always found satisfaction in fixing broken things, it was the most meaningful project she had ever undertaken.